Hello, freelance writers, and today maybe PR agents and publicists. So today I wanted to just have a quick look at a pitch that came into my inbox, actually my personal inbox, which I don't particularly like. But you will find if you've been doing this long enough, you will eventually end up on lists of PR agencies around the world. And annoyingly, there's very rarely an unsubscribe button. But anyway, that's a different thing. This one came in a few days ago and actually just got my attention. So I thought it'd be interesting to go through it. A, for publicists and PR agents who might learn a thing or two about how to pitch an editor and a journalist. But also for writers, because what is interesting here, I think, is that the concepts we've already been discussing in the travel writing school and in some of my coaching and that sort of thing. They stand out here as well, even though this is a publicist pitching me, selling her clients. So I think it's interesting to see that the concepts, the ideas of how to engage an editor or a writer are universal. You know, this isn't rocket science. This is just about appealing to natural human storytelling and story appealing instincts. So let's get into it. So this was, I don't actually know who this is, didn't recognize the name, Olivia, or the Delivering Asia website. I've looked it up. They're apparently now quite a big agency in Asia. The first thing that stood out though was the very first two words of her subject line, story pitch. This immediately made this kind of interesting. Because it tells me that she's actually thinking about the stories that might come out of these pitches. She isn't just saying, James, here's my client, help me promote her. She actually understands that what a journalist or what an editor really wants is stories. So this immediately tells me, A, it could have been a freelance writer, and I don't commission much these days, so that was in itself kind of interesting. But B, it tells me that even if this is a PR agency or a publicist, she understands that what I'm looking for is stories. Now the rest of her subject lines, Michelin star chef, wine cellar of memories, Vietnam's first pho-inspired tasting menu. It's a little bit long-winded. I would pick one story angle and just go with that and make it as brief as possible, because as you can see here, I mean, I've condense that down a bit, but when your subject lines get cut off all the time, so you really want to try and get them short and sweet, and so the editor can actually read them here without having to click into the email. And this is actually the story in the email that interests me, but she hasn't sold it very well in the subject line here, wine cellar of memories. That's a bit vague and weird. This one, Vietnam's first pho-inspired tasting menu at JW Marriott, is good because it has this first superlative word, which makes it unusual and stands out. But again, it's right at the back of the subject line. So this is a great start, but I would have picked this story idea, but made a much better headline for it. So let's get into the actual pitch. She hasn't gotten my name here, so it's obviously just a blanket email that she's sending out to people. And my name is probably not in their database, so that's a little bit of a turn off. It's obviously not personalized, but anyway, it's not a biggie. I'm reaching out to share some culinary updates from JW Marriott Phuoc Emerald Bay Resort and Spa destination, quickly becoming one of Asia's most dynamic fine dining addresses. The resort has recently launched 3 distinct initiatives. That's okay. It's a little bit PR-y, but I like the formatting of her stories here. The yellow highlight for the actual title of each story, and just a brief description of each, and then a sign off right at the end with a link to see pictures. So the general structure is good. And like I say, story 1 is so-so, it's okay. If I was kind of a food editor, it might intrigue me. But the one that really stood out to me was this one, the only restaurant in Asia that keeps every empty wine bottle. Now that's a really good headline. You know, we've talked in the group before about superlatives, so the only restaurant in Asia, it's a great superlative that keeps every empty wine bottle. And that's kind of unusual and interesting as well. And she talks about how this pink pearl has kept every empty wine bottle served in the restaurant. It's cleaned, labelled with the guest's name, and returned to the wine cellar, creating a personal archive that now numbers over 2,500 bottles. So that's kind of an interesting insight into how this restaurant runs and might make a nice little story. Third idea, Vietnam's first pho-inspired multi-course tasting menu at Tempus Fugit. Again, the word first is a nice superlative, and that makes it unusual and newsworthy. If I was a food editor or running a food section in a magazine, this might be pretty interesting, certainly just for a kind of a little news in brief section at the front of the magazine. It might work well. And then she leaves with some links to images there. So a pretty good email, I would say. I think if she really wanted to make this superb, like I say, cut this down to just the most interesting story. You know, things like this subject line, that they're not meant to, they shouldn't be trying to sell everything that we're going to say. What the subject line is trying to get us to do is to open the email. Then once we're in the email, we can add more, we can have several stories or whatever it is. Like I say, these stories for me could have been thought about a little bit better, could have had a little bit more superlative in there, but she offers an interview with this Michelin star chef, which is great. I would possibly have put that much further up, that there's an interview opportunity here, because that's the access that also is always really interesting. This story was great. I would, as an editor, I'd be considering potentially assigning this to a writer, because that's just kind of a nice headline, really. The story obviously can be summed up in 2 short paragraphs, but if you can get an interview there with the head of wine, or you could have some examples, you know, it could be a nice photographic story as well. So this was the one that really got my attention, and this one was okay. Again, for a food editor it might work, but you know, unusually for a publicist, for a PR agency, this was a good pitch of an email, I thought, with some nice elements that really can be used by freelance writers pitching to editors as well. So that was that. Hope that helped.